Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Good morning or afternoon or evening, I guess, depending on where you are. I think we have people joining from all over the place. So, yeah, we'll wait a couple minutes and let people trickle in, but feel free to say hello in the chat. Great to see some familiar names popping in. People from the UK joining. Very cool. We'll just give it another minute, let a few more folks join, and then we'll get going. From France, very cool. Very international group today. It's awesome. Cool. We'll just give it another minute since we're a little early. First day of spring. I did not realize that. Very, very exciting. Definitely very ready for it. Thunderstorms in Vancouver today, so not feeling too spring-like, but hopefully soon. Okay, great. So we are at 10 o'clock Pacific time, so we'll get going. So hi everyone, welcome. We're so glad you could join us today for Voicemail Talks, Debunking Masculinity Norms in Schools. My name's Charlotte Kinloch, my pronouns are she and her. I'm the community lead at Next Gen Men, and I'll be guiding our discussion today. Before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining the call today from the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I invite you to share in the chat where you are joining from if you'd like to. And I'll also share this resource called Whose Land, which I like to share a lot. I found it really helpful in just learning more about the history of the lands that I'm now calling home. So as I said, I'm the community lead for Next Gen Men. Next Gen Men is a small but mighty Canadian nonprofit working towards a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm by changing the way that we see, act, and think about masculinity. Before we dive into our conversation today, I wanted to introduce Voicemail for those of you who may not be familiar. So Voicemail is the longest running pro-feminist men's magazine in North America. It is a chronicle dedicated to telling the stories of the diverse pro-feminist men's movement. Next Gen Men recently became the new publishers of Voicemail magazine, and we are dedicated to continuing its legacy in exploring masculinity, gender justice, and social change through stories of hope, healing, and collective action. This event today marks the launch of Voicemail Talks, an event series designed to amplify the conversations sparked by Voicemail magazine. Voicemail Talks brings together experts, advocates, and allies around Voicemail's core mission of promoting positive masculinity and fostering discussions on how we can create a more just and inclusive world for everyone. So here is what we will cover today. We'll start by introducing our panelists. We'll talk a bit about why this conversation is so important. And then we'll move into the practical part, learning from our panelists about how we can actively work to challenge and change masculinity norms in schools. And we'll aim to leave around 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, and you can all ask your questions. So on that note, feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A box throughout our conversation, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. The Q&A box is located at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom control bar. And another quick housekeeping note, this session is being recorded. We'll send out the recording afterwards to anyone who registered, along with some extra resources and contact information for our speakers. So now let's meet our panelists. So first up, we have Laura Stocker. We'll start with you. So tell us a bit about yourself and your work in this space.
Hi, Charlotte. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be taking part in the first voicemail talks and continuing the conversation I put forward in my article, calling for the need to debunk harmful gender norms in school, with you and Christopher and Jonathan and everyone who's joined us today. So thank you all for being here. My name is Laura Stalker and my pronouns are she, her. And my professional background is in international development. I'm currently consulting for an international organization in global health, but my real interest lies in gender issues and the intersection with school education and curriculum. And I have a master's in gender studies where I really delved into that intersection for my dissertation. So the voicemail article is really a continuation of some of that work and research I was doing for that. And I'll just say I'm in the midst of writing a handbook for educators, really fleshing out more concretely the ideas I put forward in the voicemail article with information and strategies on how educators can be bringing discussion of some of these topics into the classroom. And I'll touch a little bit on that today as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. We are very excited to read the handbook when you're finished. So next up we have Christopher Pepper. So Christopher, tell us a bit about yourself and your work in this space.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you today. My name is Christopher Pepper. My pronouns are he and him. I'm based in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and I work for San Francisco Unified School District, where I've been a teacher and now a teacher on special assignment for 23 years. I work mostly with health education teachers in our school district and who deal with middle and high school students, and I help coordinate the Young Men's Health Project. We have social emotional groups for boys in middle school and high school running in our schools. It's a project I really love. It's close to my heart, and I've learned a lot from Next Gen Men. And I've been putting together those groups over 11 years, and they've grown and changed over time. And I've learned a lot from Next Gen Men in the process of putting that together. So I'm always happy to be in community with folks from Next Gen Men. It's been a really nice connection. I write a newsletter for the public and for teachers, for parents and teachers, called Teen Health Today. And I have a book coming out in September with Joanna Schroeder called Talk to Your Boys. That'll be out September 9th, and it's a book mostly for parents and caregivers and people who work with teenage boys about how to have challenging conversations, all the things that are a little bit hard to talk about. We try to guide people through how to do that well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. And we've learned a lot from you as well. So the feeling is definitely mutual, and we'll send out details for Christopher's newsletter and the upcoming book in our handout after the event as well. So last but certainly not least, Jonathan, tell us a bit about yourself and your work in this space.
Jonathan chiming in. My pronouns are he and him, and first and foremost, I'm like a hype person for Chris for sure, and for Lauren as well. Their contributions, both to Next Gen Men, but just also to the field and to the movement, of supporting the well-being of boys and young men, is just inspiring. And so I've got so much gratitude to the two of them. My role with Next Gen Men is director of programs, and so I focus on ensuring quality in the work we do with young people, in the resources and trainings that we provide to teachers, educators, and parents. And what else do I want to say? Yeah, I'm really passionate about this stuff. I'll just say really quickly the snapshot. Like when I was a kid, I had long blonde hair and I got called a girl or gay basically every single day. And so even at age 10, I could have told you, Laura, there is some BS about what I get told I can be and how I get told I can express myself as a unique, a unique expressive boy in elementary school and high school. So I'm totally passionate about this, and grateful to be doing this work with the team at Next Gen Men. I think I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. I love to hear people's personal connections to the work, because I think everybody who's doing work in this space has strong kind of personal motivations and stories around that. So yeah, thanks for sharing. Awesome. Okay, so just start us off, we're going to dig a little into why this topic is so important to be talking about today. So I would like to invite Laura to share her insights. As she said, Laura recently wrote about this topic for Voicemail magazine in our fall 2024 issue, and her piece has sparked the inspiration for today's conversation. So Laura, over to you. Tell us a little about why this topic is so important.
Thanks, Charlotte. Despite progress made by feminism and LGBTQ activism, traditional gender norms around masculinity and femininity are still deeply entrenched, and they continue to cause harm to people of all genders. And a lot of misconceptions about biological differences between men and women continue to circulate and are often used as justification to uphold these traditional gender norms. And now a lot of work has been done in academia, in science and social science, really challenging these traditional gender norms and debunking biological misconceptions. But this information hasn't really filtered into the mainstream, nor into the K-12 education system. Now, I want to say two things about these traditional gender norms. One is that they're often leveraged and even weaponized by influential people to uphold the status quo or even to go backwards in times of backlash against women and LGBTQ minorities. We've been seeing this very noticeably on social media and in the rise of the manosphere in recent years, with influencers such as Andrew Tate spreading highly misogynistic content at rapid speeds online and really spewing ideas about what is natural for men and women that some boys and young men and men generally have been buying into. And we're seeing a particular onslaught now. In Trump's first weeks in office, we've seen a real retrenchment of the sex binary, which is something that's scientifically inaccurate, and attempts to deny and erase the very existence of intersex, transgender, and non-binary people. And the second thing is that these are gender norms and stereotypes under which children continue to be socialized. So research has shown that by the age of 10 months old, children are already absorbing stereotype messaging around them about gender. And so we're in a time on the one hand where girls are told they can do anything thanks to decades of feminism, but the messaging around them that they're absorbing contradicts that. So research has shown, for example, that by the age of 5 or 6, some girls are internalizing the idea that sports isn't for girls, or that girls don't belong in sport, or that boys are better at computer science than girls. So this type of messaging can really start a cycle of self-limiting beliefs that can follow them into adulthood. And it's not just stereotype messaging, it's also the institutions around them that they're entering into remain largely unequal. Research has shown, for example, that there's even a wage gap among adolescents, with teenage girls earning less than teenage boys. And of course, they continue to face sexual harassment and assault, both on and offline, and including from their male peers. And that can have negative impacts on their mental health and on school performance. These are just a few examples of some of the challenges that girls and young women continue to face. And they really all boil down to traditional gender norms and expectations about men and women. The other thing is that we remain in a time when what's considered feminine remains devalued. So boys are still largely cut off from accessing the parts of their humanity that are considered feminine. Things like emotional expression and empathy and caring, which are all really human traits. And so they continue to receive societal messaging that tells them not to cry and to man up, and that showing, emotion except anger is considered weak. But this toughness and total eschewing of anything feminine is harmful to them as well as the people around them. It can limit their ability to form meaningful connections, especially with each other and especially as they get older. So this means that boys still tend to learn to relate to one another primarily through physical aggression and competition and one-upmanship. And part of that is competing for girls, who they're still told to view as the ultimate status symbols of their manhood. They're learning that from people like Andrew Tate, but also from, mainstream media. And so that can really fuel notions of entitlement towards their female peers and can lead to sexual harassment and assault. And so the limited avenues available to boys and young men to really foster connection on a deeper level can leave them feeling lonely and isolated. And these are feelings that many boys today are struggling with, and it can also follow them into adulthood. And it's also part of the reason why they're retreating more and more into online spaces. Boys are even shying away from reading because it's perceived as a feminine activity. And research has shown that that's actually resulted in boys developing lower reading skills. So trying to live up to what's really, an unattainable masculine ideal where boys are expected to be strong and stoic and hypersexual as they get older can leave them feeling inadequate when they don't measure up and unable to talk about it or to seek help. And these feelings of disconnection and inadequacy and really the, suppression of most of their emotions can manifest outward as anger and aggression, which they're already pushed into, but can also end in violence. It can also manifest inward, though, as depression and substance abuse and even suicide in extreme cases. The suicide rate among adolescent males is a lot higher than compared to their female peers. It can also create fertile ground for radicalization by these highly influential misogynists who are really putting forward a glorified image of traditional masculinity. And that can speak to some boys and men who are feeling lonely and insecure and isolated, and it can appear as a way out to them. And now all of these effects are compounded by one's various intersectional identities, whether one's sexuality or race or class, among many others. Research has shown, for example, that LGBTQ youth face higher rates of bullying, discrimination, and mental health challenges compared to their cis and hetero peers. And a lot of bullying is really about the policing of gender norms, as you were saying, Jonathan, about your long hair. Young people are sometimes the staunchest defenders of the gender norms that they've absorbed, and they'll take it upon themselves to police those who they feel are not conforming. So widespread efforts need to be directed via school education, actively counter harmful gender norms and stereotyping that continue to prevail and which are based in sexism and in falsehoods, because students really deserve accurate information and knowledge and tools to critically engage with topics that are affecting them so deeply and that also continue to shape the world around them. And I think there is quite a bit of talk nowadays about toxic masculinity, so young people are aware of gender norms to a certain extent, but this messaging has seemed to alienate and scorn boys rather than to help them. So it's really about providing a safe space in the classroom where gender norms can be contextualized and examined so students can really unpack them and form broader connections and not just feel personally under attack. There's several ways to do this, and I think efforts need to come from many fronts, but I put forward a couple of suggestions in my article, and I'll just touch on those now. One is to debunk traditional gender norms in various school subjects using a range of scientific and other evidence to really interrogate the misconceptions that continue to circulate about biological differences between men and women, about their brains and their bodies and their hormones and their behaviors and their abilities, Using accurate and up-to-date information, and to really make clear that socialization plays a big part in how people think and act, and that it just doesn't make sense to talk about biology devoid of the social and cultural context. So to really emphasize that nature and nurture are intertwined and can't be separated out. And another is to make patriarchy visible by studying it in school. Patriarchy is a system that has shaped our institutions as we know them today and continues to permeate various aspects of society, whether politics or economics and culture and interpersonal relationships, even education. But despite it shaping our institutions for millennia, the concept of patriarchy itself is absent from school curriculum. So I think, students need opportunities, for example, in social studies classes where they can learn about patriarchy and understand it as a form of socialization and a form of social organization and a product of history, and understand how norms around masculinity and femininity have been developing over thousands of years and have been policed throughout this time, and to really understand how they serve to uphold patriarchy. And to understand that it's not just about women's oppression, that, it's a system that harms everyone, including men. And perhaps most importantly, that it's a system that's not set in stone. I just want to end by saying that, ultimately we need to help young people understand that the vastness of human existence and experience just doesn't fit into a rigid binary model, and to empower them to recognize the social forces still trying to push them into one, so that they can have the opportunity to express and flourish as their authentic selves, unconstrained from what rigid binary norms are currently dictating to them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura. Such a great way to start our conversation and just really laying the foundation for what we're going to talk about next. So thank you. Awesome. So we'll shift gears a little now and focus in on how we can actively challenge masculinity norms, specifically in schools. So Jonathan, I will come to you first. As Laura outlined, we know young people absorb messages about gender extremely early on, which can really shape their identities, relationships, and the way they experience the world in general. So Jonathan, can you share an example of a moment when you saw a young person struggling with masculinity norms? What happened and how did you address it?
Word. Yeah, one piece that I want to highlight from what Laura said is like the co-creation of school culture. That's kind of this unique space where culture is being created by these two forces, by young people and by these adults who care so much about them. And that's kind of a rare thing, and it's an important thing. And I don't think of myself as someone who's that old, but I am old enough that when I was young, people were smoking cigarettes, not vaping. Vaping wasn't a thing back then. And when I was in grade 7 and grade 8, we were allowed to go down into town from my elementary school. And at one point, we got in a lot of trouble for smoking cigarettes. And I remember a teacher having a really thoughtful conversation about it, where she said, look, I'm not actually interested in where you got the cigarettes, and I'm not interested necessarily in what you necessarily think about cancer. But she said, what this conversation is about is the fact that you can make this choice about what matters, what doesn't, what's normal and what's not, and how you show up for each other as peers. The interesting thing is, like I mentioned, I got bullied for gender norms every day. One thing that I sometimes say is I learned what the F word meant because I was being called the F word. And no teacher ever said this is a cultural choice that we've all made, about what boys can be and how we can show up and what masculinity really means. No teacher navigated that for me. And that was a real loss, in terms of what I experienced as a young person. It took a lot of defiance. It took a lot of pain, and resilience to make it through that kind of thing. And it's worth saying, not every young person who faces that level of homophobic violence, of misogynistic violence, makes it through. So an example that I do want to share about, that's not just me, about a young person struggling with this pressure to fit in, is a class of grade 7 and grade 8 boys. where we were running a Next Gen Men workshop back in the day, and we were talking about gender norms, and specifically, you might have heard of the phrase the man box. So these like rigid set of cultural expectations about what it means to be a man, to be strong, to be tough, to be confident, to not ask for help, to be able to get girls, like all these sorts of cultural expectations. And he shared when he was in grade 6, he tried gymnastics. And he was actually so naturally gifted at gymnastics that in his very first year, he went to provincials. So it's just this complete natural athlete with a high level of grace and strength. And at that time, his school was proud of him. This is a different school. He had switched schools for grade 7 and grade 8. And he said, my school was so proud of me, they put it on the announcements. Congratulations to so-and-so for going to provincials for gymnastics. And that's when his friends found out. And that's when he quit. Because he started hearing from his friends, gymnastics? Like, what are you, gay? You know? And it was little comments, it was microaggressions, often it was jokes, but it was enough that he said, this is not worth it. It's not worth the level of judgment that I'm experiencing. And I'll just drop it. And the thing that's kind of sad for that about me is, like, I mean, sure, we have all these, like, we have our own personal stories. We have kids in our classrooms, but for me, this story is memorable because he was so good. It's not like it was just like a side thing that he was maybe not interested in. He was passionate and skilled, and the world lost that because of the masculinity norms that were, you know, imposed upon him. And so in terms of like, how did you address it? You know, I basically was like, that sucks. And shit, let's talk about this, and let's talk about the choices that we make as a group of young peers for what's okay and what's not, and how we support people who are different from us and value their unique interests and passions, even when those things aren't necessarily part of the status quo. Now, I wish there was a really simple solution. Like, I wish there was a silver bullet. But I really think it's in conversations like that where young people have opportunities to be sincere, to be heard by their peers, and to work together to create a blueprint for a new path forward that transformation can start to take place. I think I'll leave it at that. I don't know if Chris has a different story, but I'll pass it back to you, Charlotte.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Yeah, the impact, I mean, something that's supposed to be a joke can just be so hard hitting and have such a lasting impact, can it? Like, I'm sure we can all remember the times we were made fun of for a pair of shoes or something we were wearing, you know, to school or elsewhere, and it's like, I'm never going to wear this again. There goes that pair of shoes. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. So yeah, Christopher, same question to you. Can you share an example of a time when you saw a student struggling with masculinity norms? What happened and how did you address it?
Sure. Thank you so much. Jonathan's story was really bringing me back to, you know, what it feels like to be a young boy, kind of walking through the world and just being really conscious of it. The way you move your body, the way your voice sounds, the way you dress, the way you do your hair, the route you take to school, like all of these things, who you talk to during the day, all these things can be kind of called out so easily for ridicule and teasing, and really grounded in this hatred of either femininity or homosexuality or both, that Laura was mentioning. That is a real part of the lives of young people, and it's something to keep in mind. The story that I was thinking about happened a couple of weeks ago when I went to one of our young men's health groups. So it's a group of high school boys in our wellness center's kind of meeting space. So they're all on couches, and I was there for a special day where we were talking about birth control. And one, I think it's important to actually talk to boys about birth control as an empowering thing to say, you know, if and when you decide to be sexual with another person, and if one of you can get pregnant, you need to be thinking about how to avoid pregnancy if you're not trying to create a pregnancy right now. And that is part of your role in the world. It's not just your partner who needs to think about that. So starting from that point of view, and the boys were into it. The big activity, we passed around a lot of different birth control methods, but the big activity we were going to do is use to practice putting condoms on these wooden demonstrators that we have. And everybody did it. It was cool. But there was one boy who really stood out to me because he was talking the whole time like, yeah, I know how to put these on, but I'm never going to use condoms. I don't use condoms. And sort of in a blustery way, like, oh, that's not manly to use condoms. And it was very interesting as an adult in the room to kind of hear that land, and then actually hear the other boys kind of jump in before any adults had to speak up, kind of giving him some feedback on his expression and saying, like, you gotta take care of yourself. You're not ready to be a dad. Like, kind of, they were giving direct feedback, and I really appreciated just having a space where that could happen, and having that peer feedback. I think was more meaningful than what an adult could say. But I was aware of, like, that sense of, I'm not going to take this step to take care of myself or to be responsible because I think it's not manly. And it wasn't. Sometimes you do hear boys complain like, oh, condoms don't feel good, and things like that, and that's a different conversation. But this was actually grounded in, it's not a manly thing. It's kind of a macho attitude. And I think that's probably going to persist with a few people, but if we can move the norm so that most boys can recognize, like, taking care of my health, taking care of the community around me, taking care of my partner is something that is responsible, and it's a part of the way that I want to be in the world. I think that's an important step to take. I do think we need to be aware of just how much young people's views are shaped by both their peers and their media environment. And I got into working as a health teacher to working in sex education because when I was in high school, I had a close friend who was raped and told me about it, and I took that on as in the way it kind of only a 17-year-old can take on a personal issue, and said, this is going to be something that I work on in my life, and trying to reduce sexual assault. And so when I went to college, I volunteered in a rape education office, and I often got sent out to fraternities and male-only spaces to talk about sexual assault, and our language at the time was just not very advanced. It was sort of, here's a list of things you shouldn't do, and really emphasizing no, 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 no. And I just appreciate how much our language has evolved, that where now we can have conversations about consent, where we can have conversations about sort of mutual pleasure. And I think that's important for young people to hear, that relationships and sexuality are not about, like, getting somebody to do something. They're not about figuring out how you can convince someone. It's about sort of building a project together, where you're both are aiming to have an enjoyable experience, to have some pleasure, to be able to set limits and say, actually, I'm not into that, or that's not what I want to do right now. Or I thought this would be cool, but actually I would rather just maybe eat a pizza and watch some TV. But I think all of that work, like, really is important, and it's important for young men to get just as much of that as girls get.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. And thank you for sharing the story about your entry point to the work. Like I said with Jonathan, I think it's just always really impactful to hear what kind of led people to be in these spaces. So and also love the kind of thought of consent being more like a project that you're working on together. I really appreciated that framing. Awesome. So Jonathan, I'm gonna come back to you now for a very timely question. So with the rise of the manosphere, these online spaces that promote anti-feminism, misogyny, and just really harmful ideas about masculinity, a big challenge that we hear all the time is from teachers and from parents as well, is around how to talk to boys about gender and patriarchy in a way that doesn't inadvertently push them further towards those harmful communities. So in your work, in schools and with young people, what approaches or tools have you found effective for encouraging boys to think critically about the messages they receive online about masculinity and gender expectations?
So this is something that, I'm super passionate about. And one of the things that we start out when we talk with teachers, you know, or adults about this kind of thing is like, sure, let's be aware of the harm that's present in the normalization of this level of vitriol, you know, or this level of rigidity in either talking about masculinity or talking about the vulnerable others, whether that's to us LGBTQ people, girls, women, immigrants, you know, Jewish people. Like there's a lot of harm that's present. And then I usually tell educators, you know, the easiest thing, right, is to say, stop, like cut that out, not in my space, not in my classroom. And I give them a chance to brainstorm together, you know, why not, right? Why not just come down on it? Why not ban that kind of thing? And there's usually different answers, but the thing that then I show them is a video from a podcaster named Myron Gaines, who operates the Fresh and Fit podcast, which is popular with young men in particular, where Myron Gaines says, they don't want you to succeed. They want to cancel you. They want to shut you down. They're going to tell you that I'm toxic. They're going to tell you that my voice should be silenced. And what they're really telling you is that you have to be silenced. And basically what I point out to these educators, if you come down on these boys, you're proving Myron Gaines right. You're basically reinforcing this narrative that it's us or them, you know, and that you as an educator are not looking out for their best interests. And if Myron Gaines is right about that, maybe he's right about things related to girls and women as well. Maybe he's right about what it means to be a man as well. And all that being said, obviously, there's moments in which behavior modification and shutting something down and saying that's harmful, I'm not tolerating that in my space, like that happens, and that's important and that's necessary to do. So I'm not unaware, you know, that there's moments where the right thing to do is just to shut something down. But broadly speaking, in terms of a strategic approach to thinking critically about the online messages that are increasingly being normalized today, like I think there's got to be nuance. There's got to be opportunities for boys to have their perspectives heard and genuinely understood. So the approach that I do myself with boys and young men, and I often train for teachers, is let's go looking for the subtext. Basically, the metaphor that I sometimes use is an iceberg. And the point that I make is it's not the top of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. It's that underlying, you know, set of weight, you know, and with online messages, it's like that underlying assumptions that aren't necessarily always said out loud. And so what I do with boys is we'll either do this hypothetically, you know, talking about the messages that they can think of when they think about these online influencers who might be Joe Rogan, David Goggins, Myron Gaines, Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, the list goes on. Or we'll look at specific videos, which I find really helpful because it gives you something really tangible to focus on. So let's say, for example, we watch a video about David Goggins, where David Goggins has this whole thing about discipline, you know, grinding it out, not giving in. He ends all of his videos. By the way, if you haven't seen David Goggins, he's like running shirtless and he's totally shredded. He's very muscular. And then he has this whole, you know, thing. And then he goes, stay hard. And what I'll point out with boys is there are positive messages here. You wouldn't listen to something if it was entirely negative messages, like you're smarter than that. So what are the positive ones? And I give them a chance to like really air that and genuinely understand where they're coming from and what positive things they see within that video. And then I say, you're also smart people. Like some of the negative things, you know, where might there be harm? And maybe that's harm for you, but maybe it's not. But if you just think about this critically, where is the harm? And they'll brainstorm that too. And once we've put out those things, I say, okay, that's interesting, that's worthwhile, and that's actually not what we're here to discuss. Because everything in the world has positive messages and negative messages. That's not that interesting. What is interesting is the underlying assumptions that this influencer has made. So let's spend some time looking for those as well. With David Goggins, for example, this isn't even like a subtextual message. In one of the videos that I used most recently, he says, we need doctors, we need teachers, we need lawyers. That's a positive message, right? He also then says, we also need fucking savages. And I'm like, is that true? It's an assumption that he's made. He thinks the answer is yes. And if a teenage boy wanted to argue to me that, yes, we do need savages in the world today, I would be really interested to hear his perspective. But what I think is most important is saying that assumption is an assumption and it's not necessarily true, and it's worth talking about. With David Goggins in particular, a lot of boys, well, here's what happened. In one of the videos that we watched together, the boy was like, basically he wanted to get into this standpoint of like, is the video overall positive or not? Is it harmful or not? And he was really frustrated with the idea that these influencers get quote unquote canceled, you know, that they get viewed as just toxic, when he's like, they ought to be viewed as just positive. And the point that, again, that I made to him is that it's not about judging this video as either positive or not. You know, the binary is not that helpful. He then said, look, if you, all you ever see is, or no, if you fall for this, like because then we talked about marketing, like what he's doing is marketing. And this boy was like, it's all marketing. Everything on the internet is marketing. And if you're falling for it, that's your problem. You know, you need to be able to be critically aware of like the messages that you're seeing. And I said, that's true. You're hella fucking smart. And that takes practice. That's not something that we wake up with, you know, we're born with critical media literacy skills. And so what we're doing right now is practicing that ability to parse out the messages that we're being shown, to find pieces that we agree with, right? And to be aware when they're leveraging our feelings for their own gain, you know, or for their own attention. And in particular, to see those underlying assumptions and to be able to explore those with nuance and figure out, is that true? Is there evidence for that? What is the actual, you know, consensus in the scientific community about whether mental health only happens as a struggle when you're at the lowest point in your life, or if it's possible that you may struggle with depression even when things are going relatively well? That's a different story. But I hope I get, I've gotten my point across. I kind of digressed a little bit, but essentially what I'm getting at is the approach that I found to be critically effective is to say there's positive messages, there's harmful messages. Of course, you're smart, you can see those things, and let's go looking for those underlying assumptions and figure out whether we agree with those or not, you know, or what evidence there are for those things or not. And long story short, what we're doing is giving boys a chance to like actually engage in the conversation, right? And not just be shut down and not just be told that's toxic, I don't want to hear it. You know, which the corollary is you're toxic and I don't want to hear you. The end.
Amazing. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think like there can so often be such a natural kind of fear or nervousness from us as adults to engage in conversations around these topics, because it's like we just wanted to not be a thing naturally. But giving boys the opportunity to like really work through some of those messages and just coming from a place of curiosity instead of shutting things down can have, yeah, such a great impact. So thank you. Cool. So I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions throughout, feel free to drop them into the Q&A box in your Zoom bar, and we will hopefully get to lots of them at the end. So Christopher, coming back to you now, on somewhat of a related note as to what Jonathan was saying, teachers have really reported an increase in misogynistic comments in the classroom. Now, often those comments are repetitions of things that boys are hearing online, but it can be really challenging to know how to respond without shaming or blaming young men or boys. So if a male student makes a misogynistic comment in the classroom, how do you address that in a way that both makes it clear that misogyny isn't okay, it's not something that you stand for in the classroom, while also ensuring that student isn't alienated or shamed?
Thank you. I think it really helps to think about a classroom or a group that you're leading as a community, and the participants, they're sort of learning how to be in community with one another. So it's a way to kind of practice, and establishing norms for that group or for that classroom, ideally with the participants, is so important. So that if something is said, if there's a slur that comes out, if there's an insult that's targeted at someone, it could be a misogynistic comment. Sometimes you have comments that are racist, that are body shaming, that are just teasing someone about their accent. They're all kinds of things that could come out in a classroom. And you want to set up an environment at first where those things are they're violations of the community, and you treat them as something that can be healed. It's like a harm to the community that can be repaired and addressed. And doing that together, you do get some of that peer enforcement of like, oh, that's not a cool thing to say. People will sometimes dial back the way that they treat each other. But it is hard, and I want to just acknowledge that, like, because the media environment that boys, particularly middle school and high school age boys, um, things are really different than they were a generation ago. And some of these norms, if you look at how people play, you know, the vast majority of boys play video games, often with audio chat only. So they've got headphones on, they're playing with other people who are not in the room. They can hear their voices, but they don't see them. And it is very accepted to throw around slurs, to throw around insults that really attack people. And I think the dehumanization of not being able to see the person on the other side contributes to that a lot. And so to be aware that the kid you're working with in class may have just come from, spending 4 or 5 hours the night before playing games in that kind of environment, and they're bringing it over, and you have to kind of modulate, like, that's not how we treat people here. I do think as much as possible be graceful and be like, try and handle it on the side and talk to them, or to handle it as um, a something that the group as a whole handles, but not to get in a power struggle where you are making one kid kind of singled out and have to feel like they're on trial for something they said. It's a misstep. We have to respect, like, these are learning spaces, and young people are going to make mistakes in what they say. They're going to not necessarily trying to hurt someone else, or even if they are trying to hurt someone else, they deserve a chance to repair it. So being aware of that, like, you have to be really in tune to that. And we are at a disadvantage because just the way that technology has changed, where a phone used to be in someone's kitchen or living room, and you could kind of hear when a teenager was on the phone, you could hear the other side of their conversation. As an adult, televisions, people would sit and watch a television together or go to the movies together. And now most videos and movies, people are watching by themselves with headphones, and you don't have access to hearing what they're hearing. You can't sort of give side commentary like, do you really like the way that guy treated the other character in this show? It's really hard to do that when you don't know what people are watching. So you have to get a lot more curious. I do think Jonathan's totally right. Like, coming in angry, I like to say, don't lean on curiosity. Don't, like, get curious, not furious, because I do think people sometimes get really hot about these things. And I've seen headlines just this week around the show Adolescence, where people are like, is my teenage boy a ticking time bomb? Like, you can't teach somebody if you think that they're a ticking time bomb. That's not the place to start. You have to think these are human beings that we care about, that we want to nurture into adults that we're going to be in community with. And so you got to dial it back a little bit and just think, like, okay, this 13-year-old who said something that really hurt your feelings or hurt the feelings of somebody around you or was very disrespectful, they are going to grow up. They're going to be 25 years old. They're going to be 30 years old. They're going to be 50 years old. Imagine them moving forward. Think about how you want them to treat other people in the world when they are at those ages. How do they treat their kids? How do they treat their partner, their coworkers? And what do we need to do with them at the age that they're at right now to help them learn those skills and learn those boundaries and practice making mistakes now so they're not making bigger mistakes later, and learn to repair with people. And we're nurturing them to be engaged adults in the world. And we have to think about, like, that's a pathway. Nobody starts out knowing all those things, and it's a learning process. And part of our job is to be the guides along the way, to help get them there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. I love get curious, not furious is really great. I also think sometimes it's like about how can we use empathy to understand how we can respond to this, and like, how would I want somebody to respond to me if I said something that was, offensive or slightly ignorant, or even if that wasn't my intention, and being yelled and screamed at would probably make it a lot harder for me to stay emotionally regulated enough to then like engage in that conversation, right? So yeah, really appreciate your ideas and examples there. Awesome. So Jonathan, coming back to you, one challenge that many working towards gender justice face is responding to resistance or backlash, especially in today's political climate. So when it comes to debunking masculinity norms in schools with boys, how can we respond when boys feel defensive, resistant, or respond with backlash to ideas about healthy masculinities or gender justice?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is effective entry points. And an example for that is I ran a session a couple of weeks ago where I used the phrase gender justice. And actually, that was a choice, right? I didn't use the phrase feminism. And to me, gender justice, I'm like, that's inherently representative of including boys and men in this project. And a boy told me after, he's like, don't use that word. He's like, I could feel this like collective groan, you know, with basically feminist jargon. And another example that I sometimes talk about is back when I would do, this is going back to like 2018, 2019, doing sessions on mental health, I wouldn't sit with a group of grade 8 boys and say, we will now be talking about mental health. We actually started out talking about the NBA finals, where LeBron James had lost the NBA finals playing with a broken hand and didn't tell anybody. And so we would start in this really familiar territory, whether that's about consent, mental health, gender-based violence. We start in these like familiar topics using language and words that doesn't raise red flags, and then walk together towards a space of more vulnerability, openness, thoughtfulness, or criticalness, about the world. So that effective entry points is a really helpful place to start. And then I would say one of the most like important or impactful, useful tools that I've used is, shout out Next Gen Men's own product, nextgenmen.ca/boys-will-be card deck. It's a set of affirmations, and it's one of my favorite things that I've ever created. I co-created with a past colleague named Adrian Leckie. It's a set of qualities, and some of them are representative of traditional masculinity ideology. They're strong, confident, determined, for example, and others are not. They're a more full expression of humanity. There's loving, sensitive, generous. And what I do with these is I give boys an opportunity we scaffold up to it, but then basically choose for themselves, which qualities do I care most about? Like, which of these do I genuinely want to be? And what that means is I've not told them necessarily what positive masculinity should mean to them. I've given them an opportunity to explore for themselves what it means. And a story that I sometimes tell is we built the whole pyramid of gender-based violence. It was a grade 10 session on challenging microaggressions, recognizing your role as a bystander, that kind of thing. And if I didn't use this boys will be affirmations deck, it would be very hypothetical and it would be somewhat performative. Oh, I'd say the right thing because I'm talking to a teacher who expects me to say that I would do that. But is that really so realistic? Maybe not. But I had this boys will be scaffolding self-selection, a boy who chose humility. I want to be humble. And his scenario that he was discussing was a girl fumbling a Frisbee, and then a boy next to him saying, girls, am I right? And it's like, it's just a joke. And it's the smallest joke. It's the stupidest joke. Like, it doesn't really matter. We know that it matters because we just built this pyramid that represents the fact that these microaggressions, these jokes, these little bits of language lay the foundation for attitudes and beliefs and behavior, that obviously lead to severe forms of sexual violence, just as one dimension, of gender-based violence. So we know that, yeah, it matters. We know that genuinely, you should probably say something, but he was like, I want to be humble. If I'm humble, maybe I just say, dude, I drop the Frisbee all the time. Everybody makes mistakes. And the cool thing there is he hasn't been asked to contort himself into something that he's not. He hasn't been told you need to be like some social justice warrior, champion of positive masculinity. He's just been given an opportunity to say for himself, the kind of young man that I want to be is a young man who's humble. And then he's been given a chance to think about what that might look like in the context of gender-based violence. And if he actually did that, he would do two things. He would destabilize that whole system, right? He would. And he would take one step closer to the kind of young man that he wants to be. Both of those things can happen at the same time. So to summarize my answer to this question, like I think an effective entry point gets boys in the room, and then like giving them a chance to like genuinely be the leaders of what it actually means to them, what it actually looks like to them, and what impact it might have both on their lives and the people around them. Like at that point, I'm just their cheerleader, right? I'm not their change agent. I'm not their teacher. I'm not their like Lord Almighty telling them what they've got to do. I'm just the one being like, hell yeah, bro. Let's see what happens next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Cool. Okay, so Christopher, I will come back to you now. And this is the last question for our Q&A. So yeah, if folks have questions, and we're doing pretty good for time. So yeah, if you have questions, pop them in the Q&A box and we can get to them afterwards. So we know that this work needs to go beyond individual conversations. We need structural changes to support students' ability to define their own ideas of gender in ways that feel authentic to them. So before we move to Q&A, I would love to talk a little about shaping culture in our schools. So Christopher, I wondered if you could share ideas around what structural or policy changes schools can implement to support this work and to create a school culture where gender inclusivity and diversity is normalized.
Sure. I really like the work that the American Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has branded as what works in schools. And this is an approach that is grounded in 3 different things that schools can do. One is to provide health education that's comprehensive, that includes talking about mental health, substance use, healthy relationships and sexuality in a broad way that really gets into those issues, because I do think people need information and need a space to talk about these kind of challenging issues that people struggle with. Having a classroom space to do that is super important, but that can't exist on its own. Having a health class by itself is not enough. So there are 2 other elements in this model of what works in schools, and the other elements are access to health services. So this is making sure that students who need help have a place to go. So on our schools in San Francisco, we have wellness centers at the school that provide, if you're sad because your grandma's in the hospital, or because the person you were dating for 2 years just broke up with you. Those are things you can go and talk to them about. You can also talk about more medical needs. You're having pain in your knee, that you can go talk to them and maybe get a referral out. If you're worried about sexually transmitted infection or a pregnancy scare, those are things that they also deal with. So access to health services, health education. And then the third one that I think is also really crucial is work to make a safe and supportive environment. And this is kind of like what it feels like when you walk into a school door. Does it feel like, oh, I'm welcome here? Do they have signs up that are affirming of all the people who are there? Do they kind of have a message that like, we love all our students and all of our students are welcome here and can be who they are? This is particularly important for students who are gender non-conforming, who are LGBTQ students, and families, for queer parents who are going to visit a school. Seeing some visible signage on the school that says, hey, you're welcome here, we love all of our families, is super important. And those 3 things together, that has been researched. It is proven that those things, if you do them as a school, they reduce substance use, they reduce sexual risk-taking on the part of students, they reduce violence. They have these dramatic effects on actual student behavior, on outcomes for students. So that's one structural thing. I just want everybody to put those in place, the what works in schools model. And I do think that we need to talk specifically about gender in schools. That can be part of a health class, to actually study about what are gender roles, what are the expectations, like can we think critically about this? Can be an academic subject that you talk about in class, and students really love to talk about it. And I think I'd love to see more men in those roles in schools. We've had a reduction in the number of teachers and social workers in those kind of roles in schools, and I think that is not great. I think overall, I would love to see kind of a societal push in the same way that we've had these wonderful programs to encourage girls to be scientists and to be mathematicians and to, you can be an engineer, you could be an astronaut. That's great, and I love the growth in that area, and it's been very effective. Like girls are doing really well in K-12 schools and in colleges at moving into areas and kind of excelling in those academic areas. What I would like to see for boys is kind of a corollary movement that's more around emotions and caretaking, and saying like, you could be a nurse, you can be a social worker. We actually really need you to be a social worker. We'd love to have you be a therapist. We want you to, and even if you're doing a traditional kind of masculine coded job, you're working as auto mechanic. When you get home and you have a little baby, we want you to take care of your baby and like change the diaper and not be like saying, oh, that's not my job. Like be part of the community, be part of the family, and recognize that those gendered expectations we can change them, and really think critically about that. I do think because this is such an issue right now, I do think there's a space for schools to do specific groups for boys. I really think social emotional groups for middle school boys or for high school boys can be really impactful. It's a really sweet job for adults to do. If you're feeling discouraged about the world, like that can be a job that's really like heart touching to just work with boys. They really, in a small group setting, will often rise to the challenge of like being engaged and emotional. And in those groups, you want leaders who are not going to kind of lean on old-fashioned gender norms. So I don't want the kind of groups that are saying like, we want to go back to the days when men were men and women were women. We want to have groups where they're more critically like, hey, we're boys and men together meeting in a group, and let's talk about what that means. And what I hear mostly from boys is like, no one's ever asked me about that. No one's ever talked to me about that. And they have lots to say. And those groups, they don't need to be led by experts. If you're a caring person, particularly if you're a man, or a masculine identified person, or can partner with a man or a masculine identified person to lead those groups. You don't have to have a PhD in gender studies or feel like you've read every book on this. You have to be somebody who shows up every week, who cares about the people who come to the group, and who can kind of facilitate a caring conversation. And Next Gen Men has a great manual for how to run these groups. It's free. And I really just I would love to see every school have a group like that. And to think about how could it happen in school, but also out of school, like with coaches or people who are in these leadership roles. I think there's lots of room to do more work on emotions with boys and men. And that's a way that we can really work on changing the culture.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. Yeah, I love some just great suggestions. I love like the idea of putting up signs in schools is just such an easy, accessible, and like quick thing that really anybody can do, but has such a huge impact on the kind of environment you're creating. And then, yeah, just also the point about creating kind of groups where young men and boys can come together and actually have these conversations. Because from our experience, like boys want to talk. They want to talk. As soon as they get the opportunity and the permission to start having those conversations, they're like, it all comes out. So yeah, some great suggestions there. Cool. Well, thank you all for such wonderful insights. We have some good time left for Q&A. So I will just take a little look at some of the questions that we have. Okay, so we have a good number of questions now. So this first one, how do you give young boys the space to say what they think and feel when some of those statements are harmful to other people in the space? And like, maybe we want to take a second to percolate, but if, I don't know, I could call on anyone really. If anything's like, anyone's got anything top of mind, Jonathan, go ahead. I see you
of the-
unmute.
Yeah, this is kind of what Ben asked as well, and it's a really good question. Often I'm thinking about primary prevention, and first of all, like harm may have already happened, which deserves its own attention. And this is what the person is asking in this question is, what if the views themselves are harmful? Like, where's the balance between, letting them have their voices heard versus not letting them, enact harm upon others. So one of the most important tools that, it's not rocket science, but like it's worth acknowledging is the respect agreement that we always start with these kinds of conversations. And one of the things that boys usually ask for in the respect agreement, in which they are prompted to share, what does respect look like for each of you? How can you show up in a good way? And how do you want to be treated in this conversation? Is they want their opinions to be, they want people to look at each other with an open mind and without judgment. And so it's very rare that participants talk about their specific peers. Often they're talking more broadly about beliefs. So if someone was like actually saying something, harmful towards a peer, we would probably tackle that and address it and make sure that people aren't feeling specifically singled out or targeted and that kind of thing. But when it's these more broad, beliefs, so that that's harmful. That I think usually we've set up a container in which we are allowing people to show up with different beliefs and to know that's okay. And to know that they're not going to get canceled for what they said. But that what they said isn't necessarily true, or right. And so I'm not sure if I articulated this super well, but like without that respect agreement where we've talked about it ahead of time, we would be a lot less we'd be a lot more resourceless in terms of like navigating, how that harm kind of manifested. Goodness gracious, I didn't articulate that super well. And then what I was sharing to Ben is when I'm facilitating conversation, it's not that I'm like sitting back and like passively letting, sexist beliefs just like be like thrown around. I'm an active manager of the conversation. If someone's talking for too long, I might interrupt and say, I'm gonna grab the mic here and and just like, see what other people have to say. If someone's saying beliefs that are like clearly wrong, right? I might ask permission to say, can I share with you some of what I know, right? About that topic? Or can I ask you some questions about where you heard that? And the permission-based conversation, so there's the managing of like who's speaking, how long are they speaking, and that kind of thing. And then that permission-based conversation, again, is critical to me for everyone to feel respected and to not feel like I'm like, steamrollering. I just said the word steamrolling. I'm like, is a steamroller a thing? What is a steamroller? Is that the right word? Anyways, that no one's being steamrollered. I'm gonna leave it at that. But I wrote some of this in my response to Ben in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Before I go on to another question, were there any thoughts top of mind for Laura or Christopher? It's all good. If not, go ahead, Christopher.
I think just being aware of the power that you have as an adult in conversations with youth, and starting with curiosity, and because I've seen the situation where somebody just comes down really hard on a teenager, like what you said is wrong. I'm going to tell you 15 ways that what you said is wrong, and it does not encourage learning. It encourages silence on the part of the young person, and it might feel good to the adult because he really told it to him. But if our goal is to encourage community and critical thinking, that is not the way to do it. And the way to do it is harder. It is like being curious, like, tell me more. Why did you think that joke was funny? Have you ever thought about it this way? Like, you have to kind of step back a little bit. You have to stay engaged with them and be willing to be empathetic, be willing to listen to their perspective, which may feel off to you, may feel offensive, and you have to kind of just be in it with them. You have to be in conversation like they're real human beings with their own points of view, and trust that staying engaged is the best way to move people along in a more thoughtful, empathetic way.
If I can just add to what Christopher was saying, I was thinking the same thing about encouraging them to unpack it, because I think it's one thing to kind of parrot something that they've picked up on social media or whatever, but to have them actually think about what it is that they're saying and to kind of follow the trail down, and potentially also encourage if there's other kids in the room if they have a different idea. So to kind of have that peer unpacking happening was what I was thinking.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Okay, so the next question, and Laura, I actually wanted to push this one your way as well, so I'll come back to you. But the next question was around ideas for particular activities that can be done in classrooms to open up some of these conversations around gender norms. So quite a general question, but yeah, if you had ideas or suggestions around activities that can be done, or I guess like lessons and things like that in schools to open up some conversations about gender norms.
I'll jump in with two, and these are both activities that are in the Next Gen Manual Program Guide. And they're specifically focused on, like, where I usually operate is this focus on is a focus on masculinity, but they could be brought in to be talking about gender more broadly. The first one is the man box, or gender norms box, if you didn't want to, but so that's a visual representation of the rigidity of the gender norms and expectations that we experience. And we usually ask, what are boys supposed to look like? What toys, hobbies, and activities are boys supposed to be interested in? How are boys supposed to act in competitive environments, emotional contexts, dating and relationships? And we get at the boys don't cry, the boys got to be tough, like that kind of thing. And it's just, it's kind of like masculinity 101. We're just like making some of this visible because it hasn't been made visible before. And the other that I touched on is what's called the pyramid of gender-based violence. And that one's amazing because it allows you to grapple with the fact that these jokes and microaggressions, they do matter because they lay the foundation for this pyramid. And what I often point out to boys is, I hope for all of you that you're not going to, witness or experience physical sexual assaults. But I know that you're witnessing, or experiencing rape jokes, sexist phrases, victim blaming, like that kind of thing on the day-to-day basis. And usually it's in spaces where there's no other adults around, locker rooms, group chats, parties, which means you've got to be the ones, taking that on. And then my colleagues have done all cool, like we've won on memes, like where do you draw the line with some of these toxic memes? I mentioned some of these like toxic influencers, toxic in quotations, toxic influencers video clips. So there's other things as well that we've been playing with this last year especially, but those are the two that I would highlight.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Laura, I can tell you're on the edge of your seat, so go ahead.
No, I was just thinking it's not specifically about healthy masculinity, but also how teachers can work in using existing lessons. So, for example, in English class, whatever book you're reading, to have students unpack what are some of the gender stereotypes that are coming up in the book, or in perhaps a movie that they're watching in class, or so to use kind of existing material that you're already working with and how to bring in sort of a gendered angle there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. Christopher, did you also have thoughts on this question, or should we?
I added a link in the chat to something called the Get the Project. It's from the Representation Project, which is a project just to learn about gender norms that can be used in high school or college level groups or classes. And I think it's really solid.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so this next question is directed towards you, Christopher. Guest appearance from Next Gen Man's executive director. So Christopher, could you talk about some ways to encourage admin and leadership to create safe schools through more than signs and messages of belonging? What kinds of reinforcement policies and consequences for misogynistic behaviors are proven to be effective?
Sure. So I think whenever you're working with leaders, you have to do a little bit of psychology. You have to figure out, like, what is it that they care about? In thinking about school leaders, I've definitely seen schools change when sexual harassment is happening or when a sexual assault kind of incident happens at schools. So if those things are happening, calling attention to it and saying like this is unacceptable, we have to have sort of a solution that's more than we're going to do an assembly and tell you. It has to be more than that. We want to have a real program to come in with some examples of other ways to do things where you could put more of a school-wide emphasis on consent. So, principals and school leaders are often very sensitive about being in the news. So we saw a lot of change in our schools when students had a rally outside of the school district building and said, we're getting harassed all day and the school district's not doing anything about it. That all of a sudden we had a lot of change in what classes were offered and how adults were paying attention to it. So, that is media attention, student protest, often are very powerful levers, and be ready when those things happen. We see a lot of people who are just concerned about violence, either self-inflicted violence, suicide, self-harm, or school shootings. Those very disproportionately affect boys and are caused by boys. So when something, and it's in people's minds right now because of this hit TV show Adolescence, like if people are talking about adolescence, use that moment to say, hey, we can actually do something about this. We don't have to just be scared or complain about it. We can actually, these are human beings that are in our school. We can work with them. And we have models for what to do. So I think using any of those levers, you're thinking about what are the people concerned in your school concerned about. And often school leaders are also concerned about just achievement and attendance. And you can pull out some statistics on like, hey, look, our girls are a whole GPA, the whole point on their GPA better on average than boys. They're doing better, they're coming to school more, and that is true at many, many schools. Or looking at what are the rates of boys who are going to college after they finish high school from our school. And if we want boys to be more engaged in school, what do we need to do? Can we develop some programs to reach the people who are struggling right now? And the statistics around loneliness seem to really get to adults as well, of like just how many boys say they don't have any friends. If you can just have a basic group to help boys make more friends and stay more socially connected, that is appealing to both school leaders and often to parents who may support it and may go to the school and ask for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Christopher. Okay, so many great questions. This one that just came in is around, I guess, around providing kind of alternative potential role models to some of the manosphere kind of influencers that are so big right now. So the question was, are there any social media accounts or influencers that you know of who are promoting healthy masculinities and are appealing to middle school boys on TikTok or Instagram, YouTube, etc.? That feels like a hard question. Yeah, does anybody know of people? I feel like it's probably fewer than the more harmful ones, but yeah, any suggestions?
Yeah, it's often like you're like, Barack Obama, what? You know? Yeah, I mean, there's obviously like social media accounts that are funny, interesting, engaging, without being harmful. And they're not really making the news, in the way that Andrew Tate, did in 2022, 2023. But I think when I get asked this question, I usually try to point out, let's just not underestimate the significance of role models in like boys' own lives. So like when Andrew Tate was first rising in popularity, and if you haven't heard of Andrew Tate, his meteoric rise to like dominance, like he was Googled at one point more often than Donald Trump, Kim Kardashian, and the Queen of England put together. And I had a boy in Next Gen Men's Discord server, which I don't know if you've mentioned, Charlotte, but Next Gen Men has been running a Discord server, which is an online community for middle school and high school students since the pandemic. It's at nextgemen.ca/alliance if you're interested. And I had a boy in that space say, like, what has Andrew Tate ever done for me? You know, he was able to say, like, my critique with this guy isn't necessarily that he's harmful or toxic or, you know, but he's like, he's not been there for me in the way that, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but in the way that like that you have, you know, Jonathan. The important thing there is that for boys to be able to see that, you know, they have to have people in their own lives who are showing up for them, who are going to their games, you know, or you know, or helping them practice, you know, or sitting with them and, you know, or texting with them and just like genuinely showing an interest. And so yeah, I think it'd be cool if there were like some, like, I don't think anybody is doing marketing as effectively as like the alt-right influencers on the internet. And it'd be cool if there were, but I'm not sure that that would actually have, you know, the impact that we would hope that it would. First of all, because dark humor has like always been present on the internet and it like serves something, you know, in the lives of young people, especially, but also just because like what boys need is to like genuinely be held. And even like a funny and positive role model like on a social media platform isn't going to have the transformational impact of an educator, a neighbor, a mentor. So yeah, so I don't have any that like, I'm like, go follow this person. You know, I follow some helpful people online, but I don't have any that I'm like, oh, you know, this one boys have got to know about. I'm more so like, let's take that energy and show up in boys' own lives.
Yeah, I think that's right. A lot of times when we talk to boys about who do they admire, or who do they look up to, it is people in their own lives, people that they know. It's their dad, their uncle, their coach, real human beings that they actually know in real life are who comes up most often. Um, and then sports figures, you know, somebody like, you can think of somebody like Steph Curry, who's, you know, like seems to be a really good person in the way he lives his life, is excellent at his sport, and but he's not someone who talks to boys about how to be men in the world. It's not a big focus of what he talks about. He just lives his life and seems like a good person. I do think sports coaches is a really ripe area for development, that so many boys have close relationships with sports coaches. And I saw Kip from Teams of Men is here with us in the chat. So I'm going to put in a link to that organization, which works with sports coaches on both kind of learning about their own biases and kind of unlearning their toxic things that they've learned, and also working with boys themselves and on teams. So I think that's an exciting place for movement.
Awesome. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, I just want to highlight an account that is by it's Alok Menon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, actually. Alok V Menon. I can put it in the chat. They are a trans femme activist and very vocal, like just, yeah, I think doing incredible work. So it's more of an alternative. It's not specific, it's not about healthy masculinity, it's more about kind of the other options that exist. And they do really interesting book reports about kind of academic books, which they break down into really small bite-sized pieces, which I find really informative. And so I think that's a good place to start, also just for educators to read a bit more. I would go there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are getting a little closer to the end of our Q&A time, so I might just ask everybody the same final question, which wasn't prepped, so I'm putting you on the spot. But if there was maybe one thing that you would want everybody to take away from our conversation today, what might that one thing be? Jonathan, I'm gonna put you on the spot first, but if you need a second to percolate, that is okay.
I was like, can I think of something different? Because I've been asked this before and I never like to be repetitive, but since you put me on the spot, one of the things that I often say as like my send off is that like this, like people have been naming all kinds of amazing leaders. Like Carrie's talking about this work happening in the UK. Like we know Chris is a champion of this in California, and he just mentioned Ashanti and the Ever Forward Club. And, you know, we've shared a bunch of resources from Next Gen Men, but like my shout out would be that like this work cannot be done by organizations, you know, or incredibly smart writers like Laura. Like that's just not where the transformation is going to happen. And every single person on this call, whether you're a teacher, a parent, you know, or a neighbor, like every single one of us is connected to boys in one way or another. And literally just this morning, like I'm in Vancouver right now. Last night, a boy reached out saying, "Hey, I used to be on the Discord server, I used to be active on the Discord server, and I haven't been on it in a while." And I'm like, this kid's in Vancouver and I'm in Vancouver. And so this morning I sent him a picture from the waterfront, and he immediately texted his mom. I'll read you the text from his mom. One moment. It said, he texted me right away with excitement that you're here. And yes, definitely meet up. You know, then she said, he will make it happen because he feels very connected with you. And that's huge, because there's been a lot of hard time with himself for a while now. And like, what I'm getting at, again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm trying to say that like, and maybe the word desperate is too hard, but like or too strong of a word, but like the boys are like, boys are looking for you. Like boys are looking for you to show an interest in them, to spend time with them. And that's like, that is where the debunking of gender norms will take place, is within relationships where boys feel held, cared for, and you know, and with somebody that, you know, really genuinely believes they matter and they're worth spending time with. So that would be like my shout out, is that like, if there's nothing else that you do, if you're like, oh my God, I just got 1,000, you know, resources pointed out to me, literally just send a text, whether it's to a boy themselves or to a parent, you know, who lives on your street, and check in on somebody.
Oh, my heart. Okay, Laura, do you have a final takeaway for us?
I do, and it builds on what we've already talked about, but around it can be small, like you know, it doesn't have to be in the classroom. Today we're going to talk about gender norms. It's just the sort of like micro introductions, whether it's in, and again, I'm sort of referencing back to my article, but whether it's in science talking about oxytocin, or, you know, talking about the myth, or I call it the myth of man the hunter gatherer. You know, maybe let's learn about this today in social studies classes, or there's just like little small things here and there, or using material that you're already using in the classroom, but let's look at this through an intersectional gender lens. So it's just introducing those, and I think they need to come in many different little places, many different little moments. It's not just one big talk about it, or today we're going to spend time about this and that's it. I think it has to come through repetition and just sort of planting little seeds here, there, and everywhere.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And Chris, for a parting thought from you.
Thank you so much. I'm just really appreciative of having this conversation, and the space for it. I think we see from the fact that so many boys are going online and they're looking for guidance, and I don't think boys go online saying like, oh, help me find a misogynist influencer. They're going online with questions like, how do I get girls? How do I get rich? How can I get bigger muscles? And they end up through social media, through YouTube, they end up in these, with looking at these influencers who are really trying to market to them, and they're they're playing on their insecurities, they're playing on their desire to figure out how to be men in the world or be adults in the world who are successful. We have to do a lot more guidance around that and recognize those kind of core needs, provide some other answers other than what they're seeing online, because it's not great. But recognize like, hey, they're just looking for guidance. They're looking for assistance. I have this book called Talk to Your Boys that's coming out later this year, and the whole reason it's called talk to your boys is because what I see is that people are not doing it. People are not talking to their boys. They're often not talking to their teenagers at all. And I know it's hard. I know it's hard to sit down and talk to somebody about talk to your teenager about porn, or talk to them about consent, or about guns and violence, or about racism. Those are challenging conversations. I see a lot of adults who are sort of like, I know I need to talk about that, but I just kind of never got around to it. Or I'll deal with it if it comes up, but I'm not going to force the question. And I just think we need to do a lot more to really engage in those conversations. That these boys that we're worried about are going to be they're going to turn into adults that we are living with for the next generations, and we have to help them engage with the world. Loneliness I see as like, it's a crisis of connection. It's a crisis of not being able to fully express yourself and have people see you as who you are. So anything we can do to kind of help people be more fully seen, to fully express themselves and connect with other people is good for those boys, it's good for us, and it's good for the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. So as we close out our conversation today, I want to just extend a huge thanks to all of our speakers for sharing their expertise with us, and also a big thank you to all of you for being here. We've had almost 100 people in the room for the duration of our session, so there's a lot of people who want to be here and are caring about raising the next generation of men. This conversation was inspired by Laura's piece in our fall 2024 issue of Voicemail magazine. So if you'd like to read more, we encourage you to check it out. You can find out more about becoming a Voicemail member and getting your copy of the magazine via the QR code on screen. And I dropped a couple of links in the chat as well. By becoming a Voicemail member, on top of your magazine subscription, you would also gain access to our online member hub, where you can join more conversations like this that are exclusively available to our members on topics like gender, masculinity, mental health, and healthy relationships. Myself, Christopher, Laura, and Jonathan are all in the member hub, so you can also connect with us there, and others who are passionate about the pro-feminist men's movement. Also, as a member, you get discounts on Next Gen Men products and offerings. You will all receive a follow-up email from me probably tomorrow, containing the recording of our sessions and resources and contacts for our panelists. So yeah, just thank you all so much for being here, for your questions, your curiosity, and your commitment to making schools more inclusive spaces. We look forward to seeing you at the next Voicemail Talks event. Bye for now.